On the morning of 29 October 1941, Joseph Stalin stood alone by a frost-filmed window, listening to engines echo through Moscow, weighing survival against pride. The sound below was unfamiliar, heavy and foreign, and it carried with it the fate of a nation. For Stalin, whose grip on power had been forged through terror, compromise felt like betrayal, even as German armies pressed east. Only weeks earlier, the Wehrmacht had shattered Soviet defenses, driven refugees into the capital, and forced the Kremlin into silence. Now, American tanks rolled through Moscow streets, steel hulks painted olive drab, symbols of aid from a rival ideology. The convoy crept past stunned civilians, Red Army officers, and party officials, all watching Stalin's unspoken calculation. Inside the Kremlin, Stalin adjusted his pipe, narrowed his eyes, and measured Roosevelt's gesture against history. He had spent decades condemning capitalism, purging allies without mercy. Yet necessity had rewritten the script. As engines idled below, Stalin reportedly muttered a line that aides never forgot. Half gratitude, half suspicion. What he said in that moment would echo through alliances, battlefields, and the uneasy future of the war. This was not friendship, nor trust, but a transaction, born under siege. Outside, snow began to fall softly, covering tracks of fear, and masking the sound of approaching war. The arrival of those tanks marked a turning point. Not yet victory, but survival, bought with steel. In that frozen Moscow morning, the world shifted quietly, as enemies learned to cooperate. The war would demand more convoys, more blood, and harder choices, still to come. For now, Stalin watched the Americans pass, saying little, understanding everything. The silence he kept that day would shape the alliance that followed. And, with that unspoken sentence, the path toward uneasy cooperation was set. This story begins here, in Moscow, with engines rumbling and history holding its breath. By 7 November 1941, Moscow prepared for its most dangerous ritual, a parade staged under threat, defiance wrapped in choreography. Snow-coated red square, boots scraped stone, and artillery thundered in the distance. Only miles from the Kremlin walls, Stalin stood atop Lenin's mausoleum, face unreadable, watching Soviet troops march directly toward the front. Behind the spectacle, factories were evacuating east. Civilians dug trenches, and panic whispered through frozen apartments. The American tanks, newly arrived, were already dispersed, hidden from cameras, tested by Soviet crews overnight. They were not symbols now, they were tools, evaluated with ruthless pragmatism. Stalin trusted nothing without proof, least of all help from capitalist democracies he despised. Yet reports crossed his desk hourly, noting reliability, engine tolerance, and winter performance. At night, Stalin questioned engineers, generals, and intelligence chiefs, probing weaknesses like a surgeon. He wanted numbers, not speeches, steel output, fuel consumption, breakdown rates. Across the ocean, Roosevelt framed aid as necessity, while Congress argued cost and suspicion. Lend-Lease was not charity, it was strategy, slowing Hitler before American blood spilled. Stalin understood this calculus perfectly, and respected it more than sentiment. In private, he dismissed ideology, focusing instead on time, terrain, and attrition. Every tank bought hours, every convoy delayed collapse, every mile mattered. German intelligence underestimated this flow, believing Soviet resistance already broken. They were wrong, catastrophically so. The Red Army began adapting, learning to integrate foreign machines into brutal doctrine. Mechanics cursed English manuals. Translators worked non-stop, spare parts became gold. Still, the front stabilized, just barely, under unimaginable strain. Stalin, alone in his office, studied maps until dawn, pipe smoke staining the ceiling. He said little publicly, praised nothing openly, rewarded quietly. But internally, a shift had occurred, subtle yet irreversible. the war was no longer fought alone. Outside, Moscow endured, battered but standing, as winter tightened its grip. The alliance, fragile and forced, had taken its first breath. By December 12, 1941, the German advance stalled. Frozen engines and frozen men marking the limits of blitzkrieg. Temperatures fell below -30. Rifles cracked, oil turned to sludge. And morale bled away. Soviet counterattacks began cautiously, probing exhausted German lines, testing newfound confidence. Among the units striking west were crews trained on American tanks, learning under fire. The machines were imperfect, undergunned, unfamiliar. But they started in the cold. For Stalin, reliability mattered more than elegance, survival more than pride. Reports reached the Kremlin describing tanks that moved when Soviet models failed. Stalin circled lines in red pencil, paused, and nodded silently. He summoned Molotov late at night, speaking softly, choosing words with care. The Americans, he said, understood production. Understood scale, understood urgency. Praise from Stalin was rare, delivered like rationed bread. At the same time, suspicion never faded, every gift examined for hidden cost. The NKVD watched American advisors closely, counting smiles, cataloging glances. Still, convoys increased, trucks, radios, boots, food, flowing east. Each shipment altered the balance, slowly, brutally, incrementally. German generals began reporting unexpected resistance. Stiffening defenses, counterthrusts in snow. Hitler raged from warm headquarters, blaming weather, betrayal, incompetence. He refused retreat, sentencing divisions to annihilation. In Moscow, church bells rang cautiously, hope whispered through battered streets. Stalin allowed himself no celebration, only recalculation. He knew this was not victory, merely reprieve. The war would stretch years longer, consuming millions more lives. But time had been bought, with American steel and Soviet blood. In private conversation, Stalin admitted something startling. Without the convoys, Moscow might have fallen. It was not gratitude, it was acknowledgement, colder than winter air. The alliance hardened, not through trust, but necessity. And as trains rolled east and west, the future battlefield expanded. Beyond Moscow, beyond ideology, toward a global reckoning still unfolding. By August 15, 1942, the war had shifted south, toward the Volga, where Stalingrad burned under relentless German fire. The city carried Stalin's name. And with it, his pride, his fear, and his personal stake. Reports arriving in Moscow were catastrophic. Entire armies shredded, factories fighting room by room. Yet even here, amid ruin, American aid continued threading its way through ice and fire. Convoys crossed the Arctic. Sailors freezing on steel decks, hunted by U-boats and bombers. Trucks arrived caked in salt and blood, tanks followed rail lines east, then south. Stalin tracked losses meticulously, counting ships sunk, measuring sacrifice against outcome. He understood these men were dying for a cause not their own. And that fact mattered. In closed meetings, Stalin's language sharpened. Less dismissive, more calculating. He began pressing the Allies harder, demanding a second front, demanding urgency. Steel alone was no longer enough, pressure had to be shared. American tanks fought outside Stalingrad, crewed by Soviets, burning alongside T-34s. German soldiers noticed unfamiliar silhouettes, mistaking them for new Soviet designs. Confusion spread, and confusion killed. As Paulus pushed deeper into the city, Soviet resistance hardened into something feral. Every factory floor became a fortress, every basement a grave. Stalin listened to nightly updates, jaw clenched, pipe unlit. When news came that German momentum slowed, he allowed himself a rare smile. Not relief, but vindication. He reportedly remarked that American industry, once awakened, was a weapon in itself. This was no compliment, it was a warning, and a recognition. The balance of power after the war already loomed in his mind. Aid that saved the Soviet Union today might threaten it tomorrow. Still, survival came first, ideology later. Winter returned, encircling German forces, sealing their fate. At Stalingrad, the tide turned, irrevocably. Stalin understood the moment's weight, even as bodies froze in rubble. The alliance had proven its value, but its cost was now undeniable. The war had entered its brutal middle, and trust remained dangerously thin. By 2 February 1943. Stalingrad fell silent, the last German resistance collapsing into snow and smoke. Paulus surrendered his shattered army. And the myth of German invincibility died in frozen ruins. In Moscow, Stalin received the news without celebration. Only a slow exhale and a long pause. Victory had been purchased at unbearable cost. Cities erased, families vanished. Futures amputated. Yet the balance of the war had shifted, permanently and unmistakably. American equipment filled Soviet depots. Trucks lining yards, radios crackling with foreign voices. Stalin ordered inventories daily, measuring strength not in slogans, but in tonnage. He now spoke of production figures openly, referencing Detroit and Chicago with clinical interest. The Americans, he observed, fought wars with factories, not desperation. This insight unsettled him, even as it saved him. At Tehran and Washington, planners debated timelines, while Soviet soldiers bled continuously. Stalin grew impatient, suspicious that delay was policy, not limitation. Each month without a second front meant another Soviet army destroyed. He pressed his diplomats hard, language blunt, demands relentless. Behind closed doors, he questioned Allied motives, even as aid increased. Lend-Lease expanded, more tanks, more aircraft, more food, arriving steadily. Spam, flour, boots, and trucks became as vital as bullets. Soviet troops joked bitterly that America fed the Red Army. Stalin allowed the jokes, knowing morale mattered. Still, he never forgot dependence carried danger. He instructed planners to prepare for a future where allies became rivals. Maps were redrawn nightly, arrows pointing westward, beyond Berlin. The war's end already loomed in his calculations. American power, once distant, now felt uncomfortably close. He respected it, feared it, and planned around it. Publicly, Stalin praised unity, solidarity, and shared sacrifice. Privately, he sharpened knives for the peace to come. Stalingrad had proven survival possible, but dominance was another matter. The alliance endured, bound by necessity, strained by ambition. And as trains rolled toward the front, Stalin watched the horizon, already thinking ahead. By 6 June 1944, the long-demanded Second Front finally erupted across the beaches of Normandy. Stalin received the news at dawn, standing over a wall map, tracing arrows westward. He had waited years for this moment, counting Soviet dead, counting broken promises. Now, Anglo-American armies stormed Europe, forcing Hitler to fight on two crushing fronts. Stalin allowed himself a thin smile, knowing pressure would finally shift. Yet satisfaction was tempered by calculation, timing mattered, and memory lingered. He noted the date carefully, later than hoped, later than needed. Still, he understood the scale, and the industrial might now unleashed. American tanks rolled through France. Refined, improved, mass-produced without hesitation. The Red Army surged west simultaneously, drowning German lines in men and steel. Coordination existed, but trust did not. Every kilometer gained was weighed against post-war positioning. Stalin pushed his generals hard, demanding speed, aggression, and momentum. Berlin was not just a military target, it was a political prize. Lend-Lease reached its peak, trucks forming the backbone of Soviet logistics. Officers admitted privately, mobility had transformed the Red Army. Stalin listened, said nothing, but filed the truth away. In meetings, he referred to American equipment as useful, never essential. Language mattered, narrative mattered, control mattered. Meanwhile, Allied bombers devastated German industry, easing Soviet advances indirectly. Stalin acknowledged this in private correspondence, careful, measured, strategic. The war now moved rapidly, fronts collapsing, cities falling. Soviet troops entered Eastern Europe, greeted with fear and relief. Stalin saw opportunity, buffer states, leverage, security through control. The Americans advanced from the west, equally determined. Two forces, allied in war, converged inevitably. The question was no longer if Germany would fall, but who would shape the aftermath. As tanks closed on Berlin, Stalin's earlier words echoed quietly. Help received under duress, created obligations, but never loyalty. By 25 April 1945. Soviet and American troops met on the Elbe River, shaking hands amid ruins. Photographs captured smiles, flags, and celebration, but beneath them, tension simmered quietly. Stalin studied the images from Moscow, expression unreadable, pipe unlit. The war in Europe was ending, but another struggle was forming. He understood symbolism, and he understood proximity. American tanks now stood deep inside Germany, no longer distant suppliers. Their presence forced new calculations, new boundaries, new fears. In Berlin, Soviet artillery thundered relentlessly, reducing the city to ash. Stalin demanded total victory, no compromises, no shared glory. The capital had to fall to the Red Army alone. Casualties soared, buildings collapsed, history burned block by block. Yet Stalin refused delay. Speed mattered more than lives. Across the Atlantic, Truman replaced Roosevelt, altering dynamics overnight. Stalin sensed the shift immediately. Tone changed, warmth cooled. Trust built on personal understanding evaporated. At Potsdam, positions hardened before talks even began. The Americans spoke of reconstruction, elections, openness. Stalin heard vulnerability, opportunity, and threat. He believed security came only through control, never goodwill. Reports arrived detailing American industrial capacity. Bomb output, manpower reserves. Stalin listened carefully, absorbing implications. He now saw the United States as both ally and future rival. The tanks that once saved Moscow now symbolized a new balance of power. When Berlin finally fell, Stalin allowed public celebration. Privately, he ordered preparations for occupation and consolidation. Eastern Europe would not be surrendered lightly. The Red Army had paid too much. The alliance's purpose was ending, its contradictions exposed. War forged cooperation, peace would test it. And as victory approached, Stalin's thoughts turned fully toward the future. By 6 July 1945, Stalin arrived at Potsdam, calm on the surface, calculating beneath every measured step. The palace outside Berlin felt ceremonial, but the air inside was brittle with power. Germany lay defeated, cities flattened, populations displaced, and empires reordering themselves. Stalin noticed everything: seating arrangements, pauses in speech, glances exchanged. Truman now represented the United States, firm-voiced, less familiar, harder to read. The warmth Roosevelt once offered was gone, replaced by resolve and caution. During sessions, maps were spread wide, borders debated, futures carved in ink. Stalin pressed relentlessly, demanding reparations, influence, and recognition of sacrifices. He spoke of 27 million Soviet dead. Slowly, deliberately, letting silence linger. The Americans listened, but no longer deferred. Between meetings, intelligence briefings reached Stalin quietly, delivered without ceremony. A new weapon, tested successfully, unprecedented in force. The atomic bomb changed the room, even before it was mentioned aloud. When Truman informed Stalin casually, almost dismissively, Stalin gave no reaction. He nodded, thanked him, and returned to discussion. Inside, his mind raced, grasping implications instantly. Power had shifted again, dangerously. The American tanks that once arrived as lifelines now felt like preludes. Industrial capacity had given way to technological supremacy. That night, Stalin summoned his scientists, orders brief, urgency unmistakable. The Soviet Union would have its own bomb. At Potsdam, agreements were signed, smiles exchanged, photographs taken. Yet trust had evaporated completely. Stalin no longer spoke of partnership, only balance. The war against Germany was over, but peace felt temporary. Aid had saved the Soviet Union, yes, but it had also revealed vulnerability. Stalin resolved never to be dependent again. As talks concluded, convoys still rolled, but meaning had changed. The alliance had reached its limit. The future would be colder, quieter, and far more dangerous. By 2 September 1945. The world stood stunned as Japan surrendered and the war finally ended. Stalin read the report slowly, aware that victory carried new burdens. The United States had revealed its atomic power, and nothing felt the same. Cities vanished in seconds, and balance shifted overnight. In Moscow, celebrations unfolded, but beneath them, anxiety spread quietly. Stalin ordered increased security, tightened borders, and accelerated reconstruction. The American convoys that once symbolized survival now symbolized dependence. He would not allow that lesson to repeat. Factories were rebuilt at staggering speed, often by exhausted hands. Scientific programs expanded, secrecy intensified, urgency became doctrine. Stalin reflected privately on earlier years, on that first convoy in Moscow. He remembered the sound of engines, the smell of foreign steel. What once felt like rescue, now felt like warning. Diplomatic cables grew colder, words sharper, intentions guarded. Eastern Europe hardened into buffer states, loyalty enforced without apology. Stalin believed security demanded control, history had proven it repeatedly. The Americans spoke of democracy, markets, openness. Stalin heard encirclement, pressure, inevitability. He responded with consolidation, ideology, and force. The Iron Curtain descended, quietly at first, then unmistakably. The tanks that arrived in 1941 had bought time. Time had been used to survive, rebuild, and prepare. Now, the contest would be different, bloodless perhaps, but relentless. Stalin no longer needed American steel. He needed parity, deterrence, and leverage. The alliance faded into memory, replaced by suspicion. In speeches, Stalin referenced wartime unity sparingly. Privately, he dismissed it as temporary necessity. History, he believed, respected strength alone. As peace settled uneasily, a new conflict took shape. By 5 March 1953. Joseph Stalin lay dying in his dacha. The world he shaped already fracturing. Snow fell outside Moscow, just as it had when American tanks first arrived. Time folded inward, memory resurfacing in quiet moments. The convoy from years earlier returned to him. Engines rumbling, choices narrowing. He had accepted help then, not from trust, but from necessity. That decision saved the Soviet Union and reshaped the world. The alliance it created never survived peace. Stalin believed history punished weakness, rewarded foresight, and forgave nothing. His words from that first convoy echoed in recollection, pragmatic and cold. The Americans, he had said, knew how to build war. It was not praise, but acknowledgement. That truth guided every post-war decision he made. The Soviet Union emerged scarred, powerful, and permanently suspicious. The Cold War followed naturally, almost inevitably. American tanks had once rolled into Moscow as lifelines. Years later, they faced Soviet tanks across divided Europe. The circle closed without apology. Stalin's legacy remained contested, feared, and unyielding. He left behind a nation rebuilt in steel, secrecy, and resolve. The moment he watched that convoy pass marked the beginning of a new era. Not friendship, not gratitude, but awareness. Awareness that power determined survival. As Stalin's eyes closed for the final time, the world stood divided. The choices made under siege echoed through generations. History remembered the tanks, the silence, and the sentence never fully recorded. In that pause, between engine noise and falling snow, the future was decided.